Now, you said something very interesting there and very important in my view. You talked about empirical evidence in relation to the importance of fathering. Empirical evidence, reason, evidence-based decision making, calm, thoughtful deliberation rather than emotion. In other words, the difference between thinking and feeling seems to me to be incredibly important. We should follow the facts to where they take us. But we're confronted by, it seems to be, you mentioned and you said they're not related, but we tie them together, cultural Marxism and postmodernism. It seems to me the cultural Marxist will deliberately distort the truth because of their agendas, or hide the truth because of their agendas. The postmodernists have fallen into this trap of, if you like, moral relativity. So what's good for you is true for you, and what's good for me is true for me, even if they're really painting black as white and white as black. Isn't that a problem?
It's worse than that in some sense, because it's not even what's true for you is true for you and what's true for me is true for me. It's what's true for your group is only good for your group, and what's true for my group is only good for my group. And so that sets us off in group conflict in a tribal sort of way. You know, the real radical types who are swallowed up by this ideology believe that science itself is nothing but a Eurocentric patriarchal construct. I mean, they dispense completely with the fact that scientific discovery has given us this incredible technological power that's lifted the entire world out of abject poverty in a period of about 150 years. For them, for some reason, that doesn't constitute evidence. And so when you bring up evidence, there's hand waving, because the people who dispute this sort of thing rarely know the details of the literature. They just write it off and say, well, that whole scientific enterprise, that's just part of the way that Eurocentric males dominate and destroy the planet. It's all power games for these people. There's no reality at the bottom of it outside of the power game. And so that's a viewpoint that leads inevitably to tribal conflict. That's all. That's what it does.
Now, you might be able to help me. I think it was George Orwell who made a reference to an idea being so utterly stupid that only a member of the intelligentsia could believe it. No sensible person in the street would accept it for a moment. There was a bit of there that night. I would have thought you actually made a comment, I thought a very astute remark about something that seemed absolutely obvious, and then you finished it by saying you would have thought someone in a university somewhere might have noticed. Now, if I'd been an academic at any university in Australia, I would have realised that I needed to wake up to myself, because the audience lifted the roof off the place with their applause. They are highly sceptical about what is happening now in our educational institutions. There is no other way to read that audience of 1,000 decent Australians. They are very sceptical about the value for money we're getting now out of our tertiary education sector.
Yeah, well, it's the whole education sector too, I would say, increasingly from kindergarten all the way through university. Yeah, I think that I'm increasingly embarrassed to be a member of the academy because of that. Like, I was reading this book today by a Norwegian called Progress. It's a really good book. I would highly recommend it. Very straightforward. And all it is a compendium of empirical facts about how much better the world has been getting for the last 150 years in just every possible way. 300,000 people a week are being hooked to the electrical power grid, right? We've almost eliminated starvation throughout the world, except for political reasons. And starvation was a big problem in places like Sweden and Italy less than 100 years ago.
Ireland.
People have access to fresh water, and the fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're just making progress on every possible front. And everything that people learn in the education system seems to be associated with the idea that human beings are a cancerous growth on the planet, that we're going to hell in a handbasket, and that we're going to burn ourselves out in the next 50 years and die. And it'll be our fault too. And, you know, it's just not the case. It's simply not the case. I mean, we have problems in front of us, but there's a deep anti-human ethos that permeates that. And, you know, maybe it's still a hangover from our pessimism from the Cold War. You know, because everyone was truly terrified for about 5 decades that we were going to put everything to the torch. You know, and maybe we still haven't really recovered from that. And it's not surprising, because it was brutal. But reading this book on Progress just made me think again how badly we're educated, because people just don't know how much things are getting better and why. Free markets are a huge part of it. Private property is a huge part of it. And that's all associated with the idea of the sovereign individual. And so this really works. I mean, it's true that Europe got rich first, but that's only been at most 150 years. It's not even that long. It's really since about 1895. And Europe first, but man, China, there's no one starving in China. There's no one starving in India. You know, Southeast Asia has enough food, and Sub-Saharan Africa is growing like mad. And then we have our education system that trumpets that, you know, we live in a corrupt patriarchy, that we should all identify with our tribal groups, and that the right way of viewing history is victimizer group against victim group. It's like, it's no wonder people are skeptical of that. It's a profoundly anti-Western ethos. And the thing is about the West is we got the sovereign individual right. It's right. And it's the responsibility part that's right, not the rights part. I mean, the rights are necessary, but only the rights are there so that you can express your responsibility. That's the whole point.
Okay, well, let's come to this issue of our own almost loathing now of our own beliefs and values. Here in Australia now, we're having an extraordinary debate going on. A very wealthy and likeable, I knew him well, philanthropist called Paul Ramsey, who was very active in the health centre, left a very large amount of money to be made available to set up an academy for the study of Western civilization, and he wanted it to be done in one of our major universities. Now, one of our most acclaimed universities entered into deep negotiations. Then an education union got involved and said, no, this is going to be terrible. It'll be all about European ideas of European supremacy. So that same university has centres for Islamic studies, for Indigenous studies. They are not particularly autonomous in the sense that they're not particularly controlled, it seems, by the university. They do pretty much their own thing. But I know you can't have a centre for the study of Western civilization. It will fill us up with all sorts of racist ideas, supremacist ideas. This is really worrying if we can't understand our own past. In fact, there's a very wise Asian said here the other day, if you want to understand Asian cultures, understand your own first.
Well, I mean, to me, it's just, first of all, you know, in some sense, I'm less worried about what's happening with the universities than I was, because I think that they're going to destroy themselves completely if they continue the way they are. And that all that's going to happen is that people will take the genuine value in the wisdom of the past and present it in alternative forms. They'll just steal it out from underneath the universities. I would say to the philanthropist, if the universities don't want the money, then they should set up an institute on their own.
That may very well be a good course.
You can go directly to the people now. You know, like for now, so for example, for me, if I want to lecture now, I can lecture on anything I want, whenever I want, with no bureaucratic restrictions, and I have an audience of people who are only listening because they want to listen. That's where the university is. The university is where there's an audience of people who are only listening because they want to be educated. That is the university. The buildings are irrelevant.
Let's build on that for a moment, because watching this debate unfold in Australia, we're listening to academics saying, oh, no, we've got to preserve our academic integrity, and we're here to protect our policies of diversity and inclusiveness and all of those sorts of things. And somebody tartly pointed out, actually, we thought they were there to teach our young people how to think for themselves primarily.
That isn't what they're there for, because that's predicated on the idea that there are sovereign individuals and that they can actually think for themselves as individuals. The whole idea here is that you're not an individual, you're the member of a group. That's it. And they're serious about this. This isn't a trivial objection. It's a fundamental objection. But I would also say, look, there's a New Testament statement, don't cast pearls before swine. And you know, that usually has to do with words, right? Don't waste words of wisdom on those who will not hear. But you could also just look at it literally. If you have pearls and you're trying to give them to someone and they won't take them, then go find someone else to give the pearls to. If you're trying to give money to a university to do something great and they won't take it, it's obvious that they don't want to do anything great. So don't give them the money. It's the wrong people.
Okay, well, let's tease this out a little bit more. Wisdom, you've mentioned. The difference between, if you like, knowledge and accumulated cleverness and what have you, and wisdom. Surely there's a difference, because to go back again to Chatswood, I would say a good chunk of the people there were not university educated, but they were smart. And I'd say more, they were wise.
They were striving for wisdom, and that's where wisdom is. Wisdom is in the striving for wisdom. And
Right.
wisdom is how to act. Wisdom isn't a collection of facts. Wisdom is knowledge of how to conduct yourself in the world. So it's an action, it's an existential issue. It's truth as revealed in action. That's wisdom.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you value vital conversations like this one, please like, share, subscribe, and join the conversation.